So good evening and welcome everybody to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council special meeting for Monday, June 16th, 2025. And we are going to call the meeting to order. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Thank you, council. It's adopted by unanimous consent. And with that, we're moving on to public comments. Mark, would you mind grabbing the clipboard and just checking to see if somebody signed in and left? Negative. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. With that, we are going to open and close public comments. Thank you, everybody. Tonight we have two items for discussion, consideration, and or action. Item A, we're starting with this. Ordinances 25-1309 and 25-1310 middle housing, accessory dwelling units, and lot unit subdivision code amendments. Thank you. Director Hoffman, you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. The city has come a long way through Planning Commission and City Council, so I won't recap that yet again, but I will update that in your packet materials delivered Friday, we have incorporated clarity, changes, and so forth to address the comments that we received. The public hearing was held last week, Thursday night. That has passed. The Department of Commerce 60-day review period is over. Those comments were limited and incorporated in. The determination of non-significance resulted in no comments, and the determination was not appealed. We have tonight available for discussion and final revisions, clarifying typos, that type of thing in the format that we now have, which is two ordinances with Exhibit A consisting of the amendments. We have a regular meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. June 26th for potential action. The recommendation is for approval, and then we'll go from there. I won't recap the rest of it. Staff's available for questions.
Colleagues, questions for Director Hoffman? We want to lead this off? Everyone's looking thoughtful. Yes, Deputy Mayor Furtado.
First, I wanted to thank both Director Hoffman and Ms. Tappert for their prompt responses. And I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to confirm that in the Exhibit A, all the red materials are the changes that we asked for, or the ones that were there previous?
It's both. Everything in red is an amendment. In that structure, anything that's underlined is proposed to be added to the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code. Anything that's in strikeout format is to be deleted. And in Exhibits A for Ordinance 1309 and 1310, at this point, only those chapters and sections proposed for amendment are shown, whereas the prior exhibits had beyond that. To give context, we are now at a point where the amendments are shown in that format and no other amendments are proposed that aren't shown.
Thank you.
Colleagues, are there questions for Director Hoffman? Yes, Vice Chair. Colby.
Yeah, so I think all of the questions I had previously asked have been answered. I was hoping maybe just to get a bit of perspective about what is in this ordinance versus what's on the Planning Commission's parking lot. So do you have a sense, or do you have a list of what's in the Planning Commission's parking lot to continue their discussion of housing?
I do, and I could speak to it tonight. As I mentioned last week, I have a draft. It's not made beautiful yet to be distributed. I know what's on it. I can mention a few items, and I imagine, given that I didn't work over the weekend, My plan is to do it before Thursday's vacation. Specific to this, there are two specific parking bits of legislation that we need to address in the parking lot. One is the recent transit-oriented development legislation that came through this session. And actually, if I can grab it real quick, we'll cite the number for the other one.
5148.
I believe that is the number. There's a third one that I think was brought up that we are not subject to. So those parking related reviews and amendments are in the Planning Commission's parking lot, not reflected here. What is reflected here are parking requirements specific to House Bill 1110 and 1337. There are many other bits of legislation that will bring analysis to existing code. One was mentioned at a prior council meeting, which was the progression of parking spaces from low density residential to apartment to multifamily. That is now in the parking lot as part of that package. I'll also mention another item in the parking lot deals with legislation around lot splits, specifically House Bill 1096. So while 3 to 4 specific items of legislation are addressed in these amendments, not all of the legislation before us is. And that represents the parking lot.
Council, I'd just remind you that our friend Ms. Tapert is with us as well to help if you need any assistance from the specifics that were technical things with the Planning Commission. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Tapert. Yes.
And for Councilmember Goldman, I think you're aware of this. We also previously talked about potential consolidation of like zoning districts, discussion at Planning Commission about minimum lot areas, and anything that is closely associated with that as we go into that effort.
Yeah, so sounds like the Planning Commission has a fairly full agenda coming up.
They do. Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Riddle.
So, okay, I'm right. Okay, so has there been any discussion about like conditional uses on a property that has been subdivided into unit lots? Did the Planning Commission address anything around that part of the current single family code?
They have not, and so there are
Okay.
no amendments related to that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate that.
There, to extend that a little further, there was discussion about reasonable use exceptions and what may constitute a minimum development right in the future once applied for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I want to check with Councilmember Good. You look like you're someplace on your way, someplace tropical or fun. Do you have any questions? Sometimes it's hard to unmute.
It's
There you
hard to unmute because I'm not on a familiar tablet. So I'm lucky I've got this far. Well, I just wanted to say that I think that Director Hoffman and Ms. Tappert have done a really great job of adopting what Lake Forest Park, I mean, it's minimal impact to us at this time. I think it's really a sensible way to go. I think that if any additional other changes need to be added or more to be added, I think that it can be done later, but I'm really pleased with the work done to date. And so that's why I don't really have any questions, because it is a minimal, it's done carefully and selectively. So I very much appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Good. Safe travels. Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. I apologize, I'm not up on my Senate bills. So you mentioned engrossed second House or Senate Bill 5148. Could you summarize how that applies?
I cannot. I just know that when the subject came up, it was not included
Okay,
in this, and it was more closely related to what may have come out with the transit-oriented development.
okay,
And it came to our awareness late in the process, so the choice was not to stop and incorporate it.
okay.
But there's, I believe the city attorney has the requirement date And it's not related to 11, 10, 13, 37, and we can quickly address it.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. On point, I believe it did come late to the table, and the process is already moving forward. And so this is something we'll be dealing with potentially in the future. At
And
5348.
it's hard to summarize that. The primary constraint was it's not in the scope of work for SEJ, nor
Of
in the
course.
Commerce Grant.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think it's really important for us to stay on scope as a policy, you all as a policy making body. The legislature is going to do what they're going to do. We appreciate their huge work, the amount of work that they do on all of our behalf. At the same time, we can't pivot every time that something comes across our table, and it's literally came across the table in May. So it's a good question, and we do need to figure out. Well, I think Commerce will probably come out with some sort of analysis of that in very short order. I see Ms. Tapert nodding her head in affirmative on that. Thank you, Councilmember Lebo. It's a really good point. Colleagues, any other questions on that topic? Any other topic we can continue to move forward?
At the right moment, if there are no more questions, there are two items, one in each of the ordinances that staff remains available for clarity. The first one
Thank you.
is in the unit lot subdivision ordinance of 1309. It's a green highlighted section. The comment prior was that did this address current Planning Commission Chair Castick's comments? I think it does as amended, but I included his comment here for consideration so that you could see what was attempted in his comment. But I believe the consensus and the language that was brought forward is much clearer and simpler.
Yes, Councilmember Lebo.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. And so your reference was to which page?
It's page 11 in your packet.
Page 11.
Green highlighted.
It's Exhibit A to Ordinance 25-1309.
I see it now.
Yeah, thanks to Vice Chair Goldman pointing that out to me too.
So
'Cause I-
so the question is,
Please.
I'm sorry, the question.
There was a moment in a prior meeting where that was brought up and it was captured by SCJ. I was busy writing notes. I cannot tell you there was a specific suggested revision, but the conclusion was we will get back to you with Commissioner Castick's comment. And so now that we've done that, you can see what his suggested text at that moment was. And right above it, you can see what's actually currently proposed for the amendment. It's a much simpler version.
I can't remember which council member raised this question. It's Vice Chair Furtani, excuse me, Deputy Mayor Furtani. Yeah, it's a parent-child lot question. So to refresh everybody.
Yeah, I believe that Commissioner Castick's or Chair Castick's comments were trying to clarify that one shorter sentence because there's a couple of subordinate clauses in there that were a little confusing. So I think he was trying to clarify. So my proposal was to substitute in his language for the existing language if it's equivalent and if it makes it clearer.
Apologies for the highlighting too. It makes it very difficult to read.
Green on red.
Green is
Yeah.
Alien blood. There we go.
So staff has no issue with it, but we wanted to close that one comment from the prior meeting, give you an opportunity to consider that.
Yes, Attorney Pratt.
Yeah, I think Chair Castick's comment is reads, or his language reads a little differently than the shorter version that's been in the drafts, and I'm not sure that that language, I think it could be read as inconsistent with the statute. That applied to a parent lot shall also apply to each unit lot created as if each unit lot were the single parent lot. I find it a little confusing, and someone might say, well, the unit lots have to have the setbacks as well.
So if I could paraphrase Ms. Pratt, you're talking sort of a cascading effect that's moving
moving from the parent lot to the subordinate lot, and then it could actually be deleterious to the intent of the language, of the intended language. Is that correct?
I think so. I'm not saying that the language in the drafts is perfect, but it's much simpler, and I think the longer version can be confusing.
Thank you, Ms. Pratt.
All right.
Vice Chair for, Deputy Mayor, excuse me.
So, yeah, I therefore withdraw my, suggestion.
Okay, so you're suggesting we revert back to
To the original language.
language.
Thank
And colleagues, are you amenable to that withdrawal? Okay, thank you, everybody. It's done and done. Great, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor for Tony.
The next item is very familiar, and that's accessory dwelling unit development standards. I'll get you a page number. It's the yellow highlight,
It's 37.
37, Exhibit A to Ordinance 25-1310. Short summary is that accessory dwelling units and minimum lot area were an item of much discussion, including at the Planning Commission public hearing. A motion was made, and the recommendation was brought forward to City Council. I've reviewed the video, the motion itself, the language, and have some context. It's a little bit confusing through time as far as how that language got there. But for purposes of today, the recommendation of Planning Commission is to split Old D and give it to the City Council for their consideration. I believe the policy adopted in the comprehensive plan, the discussion and consensus at Planning Commission was that if you have an existing lot, substandard and minimum lot area, that you can do accessory dwelling units if you meet the standards. So there were various versions of that, but the motion made was to let the City Council be aware of it and decide. So I think it's consistent with all the prior conversation and the intent of the comprehensive plan. The alternatives would be to not allow them. The example that was discussed was if in the R20 or 20,000 square foot minimum lot area, there are existing lots that are 19, 18, rather large lots. Some don't have critical areas. Should they be allowed to pursue accessory dwelling units similar to how the amendments treat middle housing? The policy in the comprehensive plan says yes. The question was always, why are we only seeing one or two of these a year? We went into modifying code for House Bill 1337, supporting accessory dwelling units that were already permitted by right. So the language changed. The option became allow them or not allow them. Then when they clarified the motion, the discussion wasn't so much that they shouldn't be built, but should they be added to the parking lot right now? So if you have a substandard minimum lot area and we give you the opportunity to build them, shouldn't we capture that as an affordable housing incentive as part of the tools? The motion and the recommendation from Planning Commission was no. Bring the language to City Council, clarify that the intent is to allow accessory dwelling units if they meet development standards, but can be built on lots that are substandard in minimum lot area. And so that's our staff's recommendation. We don't believe it's a substantive change. It needs clarification. And before we proceed on the 26th, Section D as it's written needs to be examined, and we have suggested language tonight.
Colleagues, this is an important discussion. Councilmember Lebo.
I'm fine with the recommendation from staff
Thank you.
to allow ADUs on
On
substandard lot.
Yeah. Yes, Councilmember.
Yeah, but
Riddle.
just thinking it through, if we allow an ADU on one unit lot, it's all, I mean, that's essentially a substandard lot. So I think it's consistent with the rest of the middle housing code in that sense.
It would.
Yeah.
Section D we're discussing is specific to accessory dwelling units. Comments were made at Planning Commission. We never envisioned treating them any differently than
Agreed.
middle housing.
Yep.
How did this appear? We know how it appeared because it's an iterative process meant to be flexible and expansive. The city always has that option to insert code language that up to 9 can be included in a unit lot subdivision or short subdivision or SEPA exemptions. The city is not choosing to go there. So the code needs to be clarified that 4 and under is a short plat, 4 and under is a unit lot subdivision, and accessory dwelling units can be built, permitted by right, on lots specifically minimum in lot area. All the other standards remain unchanged and must be met for the parent lot and for the accessory dwelling unit, height, setback, lot coverage, impervious surfaces.
Okay, colleagues, any other comments on item D? Yes, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I will
Hold it.
echo council members Lebo and Riddle. I support the staff recommendations. I think it'll bring some more consistency to the code. That if you have an 8,000 square foot lot in the 7,200 zone, that is large enough to build an ADU. If it's a 19,000 square foot, that's more than double the size of that parcel. It should be big enough for an ADU, even if was annexed into a substandard zone. So I'm supportive of the change.
Thank you,
And
Councilmember.
One comment as it exists in my mind, on the other end of the scale, the lesser lot areas somewhat precludes it by meeting development standards. If you can't meet the development standards or you have critical area and you don't have the capability of building an ADU, we don't need to prohibit them outright. Those development standards will prohibit it. So on the lower end of the minimum lot area, it takes care of itself.
Thank you, Director Hoffman. Let's go over here.
I was just,
McCartney first.
thank you.
Please.
I'm in favor of staff recommendation. I know that that you guys have talked about this at great length too, so I do agree with what you're sharing.
And Deputy Mayor for a time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to pile on, yes, I also agree with the staff recommendation, but I have a question about the language. So it says to delete draft section D, and then it doesn't mean that the E that's there that's highlighted becomes the D then, right? Because that doesn't
No.
say that. Okay.
Yeah.
So there'll be new language coming on the 26th or whenever.
And we have a recommendation. Prior at that point, there was a D and E amendment. E was specific to sewer and septic. That was modified. The planning commission motion said divide D, drop down old E, which becomes F, and then bring the newly divided D, which is represented here by the two highlighted D and E, to you for consideration. The options then become, do we delete D and E, thereby authorizing that accessory dwelling units can be built in those situations, or should we do it in the affirmative, which clarifies that they can? And so that through the city attorney, we have suggested language that to replace the highlighted D and E that clarifies in the code that they are permitted. And I don't know that we could bring it up on screen, but it's fairly straightforward and addresses the issue.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is because there's another E, so I just wanted to make sure we're not butting E's here. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
I can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. So this would be the new language. It would be D, E would be, this E would be deleted, and then there is that subsequent E, as you said, Councilor Fortuny. That's our suggestion.
Colleagues, does that answer everybody's question?
Yes.
Councilor Lebo.
So with this though, there's no reference to development standards, if I understand. So they are described somewhere else. So that when you say it's permitted on substandard lots, then you have to go somewhere else to realize that it may not be applicable in that particular instance because you haven't met the development standards. Is that right?
That's correct. And most of those are in 1850-050, not proposed to be amended. So they're not captured in red line in this exhibit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues? No? Everyone good with that? Okay, moving on. Any other questions for Director Hoffman or Ms. Tapert or City Attorney Pratt on this topic? Wow, thank you, everybody.
Oh, I have one more thing. Sorry.
Yes, please, Ms. Pratt.
All right, one more thing on lot splitting. I'll just share my screen again.
Oh.
So, you heard Director Hoffman talk about the legislation that requires lot splitting. That's HB 1096, and that is in the Planning Commission's parking lot. That's effective July 27th, 2025. What I'm suggesting is that in these ordinance, we eliminate any reference to lot splitting because we don't have all the parts we need yet. The new legislation requires certain processes and criteria for approving a lot split. Administrative only, there's no appeals. Both lots have to meet minimum lot standards. Parent lot can't have been created through a lot split. Residential zones only. You have to get a certificate of availability for sewer and water. Have to provide access, and you have to give a survey. So we just don't have all those details in these two ordinances, and I wouldn't have expected us to, because it came along later in the process. So my suggestion to avoid any confusion was someone reading and seeing we have a definition of lot split and saying, okay, I want to do that. We're like, well, we don't do that yet. So my suggestion is to delete the definition of lot split that's entitled, that we were going to add to Title 17. So we would delete it from the ordinance. It's also referenced in that ADU section, that subsection E that you just deleted anyway. It's in two parking space requirement places in 1858-030 and also in 1845-110. It just tacks it on to the end in these spots, and I would recommend just deleting those from the draft. Just to clarify, we just don't have that yet. It'll be added soon.
Thank you, Attorney Pratt. Colleagues, questions? Yeah, Councilmember Riddle.
I have no concern taking kind of that partial information out of this draft. Does that, and that doesn't substantially change kind of what we have here from a legal standpoint? Thank you for the shaking of the head.
Great. Good, thank you. Looking down the dais here, anyone else? Questions about lot split? Yeah,
So-
Vice Chair.
Just a clarification, if the effective date is towards the end of July, does that mean that the full updated version of lot splitting will be before us next month to get it done by the end of July?
No. It'll be in the parking lot, considered with
Yeah.
the next round. There are bits of legislation we are not in conformance with. Given the workload and what they've handed us, these are the major ones. I feel lucky that we've gotten this far. The intent is to meet those. There is no substantial penalty for this. Will we be in compliance at some point? Absolutely.
Colleagues, just as a reminder, that's an excellent question, Vice Chair Goldman. We're trying to not make the perfect the enemy of the very good, and then the work that the Planning Commission and you all have done is very good. I think substantively, we're very close here. So those are things that we will definitely consider in short order, but not immediately. There's going to there's a lot on everyone's plate right at the moment. So does that help, Larry? Yes. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, other questions for our friends? I want to check with Councilmember Good while you're there, and you have a bottle of champagne in your limo, or no? Okay, just checking.
No, I'm in the car because it's quiet here and I can turn on the air conditioning. Other than that, it's very noisy. No, I think that all of the work that's been done, why I'm not commenting that much is because it's the approach is a very sensible one, and I'm trusting with the recommendations, and so I'm in favor. That's why I'm not really doing this. So good work, Director Hoffman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Appreciate your comments. Okay, colleagues. Vice Chair Gold.
Kind of have a more broader idea, but I can wait till everyone else has had a chance.
Let's go around the horn. Anybody else first? Thank you for your consideration. Nope, I'm looking down to make sure I can see everybody. Okay, please.
All right. So following up on some of the things we talked about tonight, we're putting a lot on the Planning Commission's plate. There's a lot in their parking lot. And so I wonder if there might be a way for us as the council to try to take some of it off of their plate. As an example, I had a discussion with Attorney Pratt about some proposals that I had previously mentioned about parking or ADUs about consistency. And her feedback was that that would require another review and public hearing from Commerce. And so it wouldn't be suitable to do it for this version of the ordinance. But I wonder if maybe if like a subcommittee of the council was interested in, working on some of those low-hanging parking lot items, if we could get a sort of a draft, it would take some of the pressure off the planning commission because they wouldn't have to build it from scratch. They could sort of look at our council committee work product and see if they like it, and then it could come back to full council. So I'm just curious of what fellow council members think about that idea.
Let me check in really quickly. Director Hoffman, procedurally, legally, does that path work?
I don't know that I'm the gatekeeper of that. The Lake Forest Park Municipal Code requires planning commission recommendation. There are a variety of ways to get there that I would not preclude. I welcome any and all assistance. It's not just planning commission bandwidth. Work item number 2 is the climate element. That's going to take the greater part of this year. I'm deeply involved in that. Their parking lot. I'm very involved in that. I already don't have enough hours to spend with my family and sleep. So if there are other resources, I welcome it.
Yeah, and my idea is that this would help to take some of the pressure and workload off of Director Hoffman, off of the Planning Commission, and just the hopes of helping to move some stuff forward.
Yeah, Councilmember Riddle.
I fully support taking that approach. I think there are certain things that we definitely need the expertise of a long review through planning commission to really wrap around the issues. But I think some of these low hanging fruit, we generally do understand as council members, it's not the first time we've seen any of this stuff. And if we can take some load off of the team and present them a proposal that they can then review and recommend, hopefully with very little extra time that they would need to devote to that. And then we would take our final action after their recommendation. I think that I'd be 100% behind streamlining that process where it's appropriate.
Other comments? Councilmember Lebo.
My preference would be that we go the other way around, which is that we look at, the planning commission, look at the things that they have on their table, the parking lot. And Director Hoffman look at the available resources and say, are there things that I think the council wants to move forward on, but as a planning commission, we don't have the resources to do it. I'd prefer that we not usurp what we've asked the planning commission to do, but rather that they come to us and say, I understand the council has an interest in this, but when we look at our total workload and the availability of our resources, including Director Hoffman, there might be an alternative. Otherwise, I'm not sure that there's such a pressing need. These other parking lot items don't in themselves create certain deadlines, except the ones that are already being worked on.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think just from standpoint of the administration, I would say too that I think that there is the brainpower need for wrangling these things, and there's also then at the end of that brainpower that you guys apply to it, for example, then where is it going to go? It's going to have to go back to Director Hoffman, then back to the Planning Commission. So we have to, I think, to Councilmember Lebo's point, I think we have to think very carefully about what that looks like and the urgency. I think Vice Chair Goldman makes an excellent point about trying to help out here because there's a huge workload. There's no question about it. I think one of the ways we can consider this is looking at the urgency, again, about what the deadlines are and seeing what we can do. So I think that the parking lot itself is something that unfortunately has grown and continues to be challenging. And so I think we can certainly wrangle this. I would also say that I think any and all offers for help are welcomed. Let's just make sure that we have the staff capacity to. Yes, Administrator Hill.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that point. I think what I'm hearing from Director Hoffman is he doesn't have the ability to support a city council work group. That's basically doubling his work. He's got what he's got before the planning commission. And so if following Councilmember Lebo's track, something came back to council, it would probably not be able to be supported by the staff as they work on their other items. So I think we really need to weigh that carefully as we consider how we may move forward.
Thank you, Administrator Hill. And Vice Chair Goldman, I would also offer that it does not mean that those items are something that you could have a working group as long as we're considering the urgency of the other needs of the staff load. Does that make sense? And Larry, I really appreciate you bringing this to us previously. So we discussed this in our leadership team, our deputy mayor meeting. And I think it needs, we need to think about where we are in terms of capacity and make sure that we're not overloading the group. So.
That says our government's manual has a provision for making a subcommittee out of the, yeah. And I don't think that needs a staff liaison necessarily.
We've done it without in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And staff use that as it rounds out the discussion about scope and focus, gives direction to a coming effort at planning commission. So I welcome that. It doesn't take my time. But what it does is when it does come to me in planning commission, we can target better.
Okay.
It's less broad. So I would appreciate that element.
No, that seems like, Larry, how do you feel? You feel okay?
Seems like a reasonable
Yeah,
approach.
we're all colleagues here, so considering the immense workload that you all have, staff has, and the planning commission has been pushing for so long on these things. Let's make sure we're figuring out where the right pieces can fall.
And the good news, the last 3 or 4 sessions in Olympia and the amount of legislation, the 2 biggest deadlines are now being met. One being the 8-year periodic update for Growth Management Act last December. And then this middle housing, which is a symbol of a lot of work to address that legislation. And the July 1st model ordinance. Everything else is not meant that it's not urgent or that it needs to comply or, it's ranked high, but it becomes a bandwidth issue and we can't do them all. Another example in the parking lot is the tree ordinance that we would like to bring to city council. There is no option to have the tree board create it, walk it in here and stand here with you and eliminate staff or city attorney or any of that process that largely goes unseen. Public notice, communication, documentation, drafting, redlining. It's a lot of work besides just here's the ordinance. What do you think?
Thank you, Director Hoffman. And what we've been discussing on point about prioritization is if there's a deadline, by all means, let's work backwards from that deadline and figure out what we have. If there's not a deadline, a hard and fast kind of situation, if it's a nice to have or it's a really want to have, we have to be very thoughtful about how we prioritize some of these kinds of situations. It's not just the parking lot items. There is an immense amount of work going on right now behind the scenes. And I know you're all aware of that. So we want to make sure that we're slow and steady wins the race here, folks. We're really, everybody's pulling their weight and making sure that we get where we need to be. At the same time, we've got to find some compromises because there was an unprecedented backlog of work when Director Hoffman took the helm at his department. And we thank him for that because he's pulled us out of some quagmires. So really, sincerely, many thanks.
And we have 2 prime examples of that: critical area ordinance.
Yep.
Shoreline master program. We have a subcategory, subdivision ordinance, wireless ordinance.
Yeah.
Quite dated. Do they work right now? Yes, but are they informed and detailed? Absolutely not.
So that's not to say that Vice Chair Goldman's idea is not a good one. It's an excellent one. We just have to then figure out that work could proceed at pace. It's just that handing it off to staff and the planning commission is something we have to be very judicious about. You were the recommender. How do you feel about that? You okay with that? Larry?
Yeah, and I think we can kind of work out the details that Yeah, I don't want there to be unintended consequences that this work reducing plan has increased work. So figuring out how can the council help to move things forward in a way that doesn't interfere.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilmember. Colleagues, other questions for Ms. Tapert, Attorney Pratt, or Director Hoffman at this time? Or anyone for that matter? You can ask Ashton questions if you like, but she's an expert.
I was gonna say,
Ms. McCartney, please.
no question other than just a thanks, and this is a fun position to be in. I'm uniquely positioned to see the work that went behind and the sausage making, and I think this team did a really, really excellent job while staring down at a massive deadline. And I think you guys did a fabulous job, and it's great to be in this position. And I know Councilmember Lebo too got a front row seat too, so just a
Sure.
lot of work. So appreciate it. Thank you for this.
Okay. Colleagues, are we ready for the next step here going forward then? Okay, so what's your pleasure?
I don't mind leading the discussion if you want.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to item B. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Hoffman,
Thank
very
you.
much. And so the expectation in if you have any additional questions, please reach out to staff on this topic. But otherwise, the expectation is we're going to be moving forward on the 26th with adoption, and hallelujah, people. Okay, we're moving on to item B, to continue discussion regarding budget challenges, including options for potential levy to fund public safety services, and review draft resolution 2021, setting a ballot proposition for the city to levy the regular property taxes in an amount in excess of the limitations provided in RCW 84.55 for public safety services for the 2025 general election. I've asked Deputy Mayor Furtani to continue facilitating this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so council, as you might recall, we have we're in mid-discussion right now. There are several pieces of paper in front of you. The first of which is the working draft of the temporary 6-year levy to support the public safety needs in 26 to 31. That's I think with the most updated numbers now, and I think it's been streamlined so that it's clear what's I got rid of all the calculations basically. And so this is pretty much as you saw it before. The next piece of paper is the Excel spreadsheet that Councilmember Lebo kindly provided, which is the Lake Forest Park General Fund revenues and expenses sheet. That's the spreadsheet that's I guess what, landscape orientation. All right, and this is basically I think I've checked this at this point now. The numbers seem reasonably good. We can have a discussion about this if you wish. And then the last piece of paper is the resolution that Councilmember Leo again kindly drafted, and we've been working on. At this time, I wanted to ask if it's okay with Director Vaughn, Finance Director Vaughn, to basically describe a little bit about the other behind the scenes work that's been going on with this particular levy resolution.
Yes, thank you. So just bringing the entire council up to speed. So currently I am working with the King County's Assessor's Office to make sure that they have a copy of this draft resolution. And previously, every levy that I've done in my past, I have worked hand in hand with them to make sure that our intent as far as what we're writing within this resolution, then once it's adopted, is carried forward as intended. Because we definitely do not want to be in the boat of that not being the case. So I am working with them currently, and I'm hoping this week to have that completely outlined with them. And Attorney Pratt will then have to again review their recommendations so that we're all on the same page. To simplify it, one of their recommendations I'm just going to put out there was, instead of trying to quote all the numbers and not the max and try to because it's very sensitive in the sense that if we list those numbers and they're variables. So we don't want to put a number out there that overextends necessarily what the city's intent is for the levy, But if we do state a number and then it's adopted within this resolution, then we're held to that number. And so we can't exceed it. So the goal was for the conversation, 2 conversations today that I had with the office through Teams, was to maybe state the intent of if the council lands on a levy of 32 cents or 16 or 24 cents, to possibly just put that intent within the ordinance. So, or excuse me, resolution. So to put that intent within the resolution and to try to minimize some of the other language within the resolution of the maxes. I asked them to provide examples so that, again, we can do this as a team. We can do this as a team with Attorney Pratt to make sure that as our attorney, she agrees with the process, and that we have that intent outlined completely through an ordinance, and then we just, once the council settles on a number that they're happy with, then we put that number in, and so and move it forward. So we would basically we would have the conversation of, if the intent is to do X amount of cents over what the city has for their current levy, and levy being the property tax. I want to make sure that the city doesn't, it's the regular property tax, and that we have that in place, that if the intent is then to, again, add the CPIU, elect to just let it follow CPIU, or to have it as stated in this draft resolution as a 5% capped annually. And to put everything that we intend to walk forward in this resolution written out, and then drop the number in once we have that completely outlined. But I want to caution, because I'm in that process, I just want to save your time, our time, and that I haven't quite accomplished what I was hoping to prior to this meeting with that. And just be honest about it.
Thank you, Director Vaughn. And so I think it's fair to say then that I was intending that this meeting, we'd go through the whereases on the 2 pages, the first 2 pages of the resolution. But it seems that might be a little premature. Yes, a significant amount of the language will be kept, because I do want enough to explain to the voters why we're doing this and what it's for broadly. But at the same time, if we're going to be changing some of the language around, I don't think basically this is the time to review that. Council, do you I just need a head nod? Should we concentrate on the body of the resolution, the sections?
I think that's probably good. I just wanted to make one comment.
Mhm.
On the third whereas, which is about the RCW, so I don't think that particularly one would change much. But I think in general, I think if that's gonna change much, then we should wait.
Right. Director Vaughn.
And we already in agreement on section 3, that final bullet point under section 3. Both Attorney Pratt put in a comment recommending that implies that it is a permanent levy, and that was the exact same, that's exactly what the assessor, their opinion of that office had that same opinion. So if the intent is to do a temporary levy, we're gonna need to strike that, just that, or rephrase it. That they were in agreement together on that.
I have no concern about that suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, all right, so let's, I'm trying to keep an eye on Attorney Pratt as well as Director Vaughn. That's also, excuse me if my eyes keep roaming, but okay. So, all right, so I think that we're in agreement then that we'll hold off on the whereases until we get the clean copy back from the assessors and have it run through Attorney Pratt. So the parts that would like you to consider, council, is section 3 on the 3rd page and section 4. As Director Vaughn has mentioned, the numbers that are in that first part of section 3 may change depending on what we decide, and the decision will be made. We'll be talking about, since Councilmember Lebo presented this in the context of the sales tax ordinance or law, the number basically will have to make a couple of choices there. So with your permission, we'll hold that off until the committee of the whole meeting next week. Great. Got some head nods. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So let's look at those bullet points that Director Fromm was referring to, that this levy shall be, and then there are 3 bullet points. The final one of which was the one that I had raised a concern about, which was that because the levy amount collected in 2031 at the end of the of this levy shall become the base for purposes of calculating subsequent levies. My read of that was that, oh, that's at a much higher level than it should have been. And I guess basically are we okay with not going that direction? Sorry, Councilmember Goldman.
Just trying to understand it, was the original intent of that bullet point to say that if after 6 years we want to renew the levy for another 6 years, then year 7 would essentially be jumping off of year 6? Was that, I mean, I agree the language is confusing, but I wonder if that was the goal, to basically explain how the levy could be renewed in a public vote.
I mean, Councilmember Riddle, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I think that implies that it's essentially a permanent levy. So as a renewable levy, my understanding is, we set the rate now and then it goes and then at the end of the 6 years, we would reset back to where our trajectory would have been had we not had the levy. And so then that would be the new rate or the new starting point for us to bring another levy to the community. That's how I thought that the 6-year renewable levy was structured. So I guess we want to make sure we're very clear that that's the intent of this document, is to produce that 6-year renewable levy. Only raises it for 6 years, then we go back to where we would have been. Okay.
Yeah, you would go back to, we were reading the language today, so your 0.71, it goes back, it reverts to the 0.71 plus the 1% that you would have been able to collect over the life of the levy. Otherwise, so it would reset if it didn't pass again. Some discussion that we've had is, whether you do CPI or not. If you take the King County Parks levy that they're running right now, they did not take CPI during the life of that levy. So you'll see the base rate is actually going up from where it is today because they didn't capture that, just to try and capture the same dollar amounts as time, inflation, et cetera. So it gets kind of sticky because if you capture inflation at the end of this levy, when you go out for renewal, you effectively would be asking for the same rate. Why would you, if that has worked for you and you've taken inflation, if that dollar amount is still what you need, then you would renew at the same rate. There's many unknowns over 6 years that may make you ask for more. But yeah, this language does imply that it's an ongoing levy, it's permanent. And so that's why the recommendation to remove that language from the resolution.
Mayor French?
Just a quick comment, informationally. I sent you guys a link a while ago to, a number of months ago, to the MRSC about the specifics of the various levy options. This is called the levy cliff, where it falls off at the end of the 6 years. I would just remind you to take a look at that again, because the graphics there and I think the description there are some of the best I've seen. I think staff would agree with this. It's very effective. I know that colleagues in other cities have talked about the MRSC's work. So I think this is important for you to refresh yourselves on this, because there are lots of options there, but when you're talking about this type of levy, it really is very instructive to see the graphic and see what the considerations are when the levy expires, just for edification.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think then we're sort of basically heading towards it's okay to not have that 3rd bullet point.
Yeah, I think it's It makes the most sense at this point,
Okay.
unless we want to change it to be stating that there's the cliff. I mean, but one or the other, but right now it's not
Right.
accurate.
And this would not be the appropriate place to
I
write
don't
that
think it would
anyway.
be, yeah.
Yeah. Councilmember Good, are you good with that? Okay, great. Thank you.
I would
Go ahead,
just,
Councilmember
I
Leo.
would just offer though, and maybe because I haven't memorized this, that the rate would be equal to as though we had taken the 1%. And so is that captured somewhere else?
So King County tracks it. So it's an as if you didn't have the levy versus if the levy is approved and adopted, they track both for each year for the 6 years.
So I guess
Walk it forward.
the numbers in the deficit assumes that we already took the 1%. So if we do a levy lift, do we still do a 1% per year?
Okay, so on the first year, you're resetting the rate. And I see that Attorney Pratt has her hand up in addition. So on the first year, you are resetting the city's rate. And so the city would not do the 1% like we have in the past every single year. That would not come forward in addition to this. Whatever amount that the city sets within the resolution, the way that it's been explained to me through the assessors is you're resetting that rate with this resolution for year 1. And then you are allowed to go back and follow up with the CPI and what you put in there.
But you wouldn't be doing an annual 1% increase.
So that goes to bullet 2 above here. So without this language, so there's 2 things in this language. One is CPI, which would allow you to capture that. The 5% is just an example that came out of Shoreline, and theirs, they capped it in case, as the deputy mayor and I discussed, if things went totally haywire and, it was 80%, you would be capped at 5. And as we discussed, there's probably a lot worse things in the world going on if it's gone that crazy. But without this language in there to capture CPI, then you are limited to the 1%. You need this language in here to be able to take up to CPI each ongoing year during the life of this levy. And I'm going to stop so Attorney Pratt can hop in. She's been waiting.
Attorney Pratt?
So if you look at the 4th whereas above the now therefore be it resolved, which is on page 48 of what's that, 45 of your packet. That's where I added the cliff. That because I thought you were going temporary. And so when it expired in 6 years, levy would revert to what it would have been, but you'd only taken the annual 1% increase. So I think we're going to see what the assessor's office says about that, and if they agree that that's what the cliff means.
Right here.
All right, thank you, Attorney Pratt. Okay, Councilmember Lebo.
So if you go to the spreadsheet, the delta between the revenue and expenditures assumed that the 1% was initiated each year, and so there's a slight delta. So the difference would be actually slightly larger by the aggregate of 1% a year. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to track, I'm sorry.
So if you go to the spreadsheet, I took the revenues increase based upon the 1% per year, and then added on top of that the levy lift. Whereas what I'm hearing you say is that if you do the levy lift, you wouldn't do the 1% per year. Because I already cranked in the an inflationary rate.
So you wouldn't take the levy lift, you wouldn't take the 1% in the first year, but you could in years 2 through 6. So the following 5 years, you could take the 1%.
In addition to
the, say, 32 cents, if that was the numbers chosen in years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, you could take 1%. Or if you included this language in here about CPI, you could take CPI if that was 2.5 or 3.2. So
But the CPI was intended to be on the levy lift amount, or do we get to take it on the total?
So, good question.
Good.
We'll have to ask the assessor's office.
Because I understood it to be that CPI for the levy lift, not for the total. And so I was already counting the 1%, but if you reset it in the first year, the delta is only like $34,000 over 6 years,
Yeah.
which would be not significant.
Correct. Yeah, we'll have to check with the assessor's office on how they implement that portion.
But I was assuming that we would, over the 6 years, take the 1%, but if it's over 5 years, that's okay. But the levy lift, I did think that we would get the CPI
On the,
on the levy
that
lift,
portion.
just on that portion.
we'll have to confirm that.
Because it's a significantly different number if you take it on the total. That's an interesting question.
So it seems like we have some questions to be answered here, so we'll get that one later. So Councilmember Riddle, you've been patient.
Yeah, I do believe, I mean, I believe that because the way that we're proposing in this document to structure this is we only have one lift, the initial year one. After that, we just do our normal process. There is no secondary lift, this and that. Sometimes, so it's in the second year, you wouldn't be applying it to the lift because you just have your rate after that. So, and if the 1% would have applied to the entire amount, I think the CPI probably would apply to the entire amount. So definitely clarify that because it's going to be
Yeah, we'll definitely.
part of what we determine that number would be. But that's how I believe it was described to us when we had folks come in and give us education on this before.
Well said, yeah. So I think that definitely needs clarification.
Yeah, and I think it's just important for us to know we have essentially one lift in year one, and then after that, we just do our normal projections.
So I think the mayor has brought up the MRSC article, and Mayor, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's the total assessed value. So
Mhm.
you're talking about, it's not, we're talking about at the 1%, they provide an example. It's the total assessed value that you're allowed to increase as you go along. And so again, we need to all review this. I think it's important for everybody to be on the same page, but at the same time, and let's be fair, folks. I mean, Washington State property taxation is very, very difficult to understand. It's the most complicated in the country, honestly, as I understand it. So we need to make sure that we have this well in hand, but it is based upon the current assessed valuation.
Councilmember Lebo.
So I don't know which number whereas it is, but the whereas the levy lift proposed would authorize an increase of approximately 1.5. The last sentence was intended that the CPI would apply to the levy lift, not to the total.
So that's like the third from the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So when I wrote it, as though it would only, the CPI would only apply to the levy lift portion, not to the total. But it's an interesting question. It's
Yeah. We'll definitely circle back.
Yeah, it's a significant difference.
Does anybody else have any comments? Okay. Okay, so Mayor, you had a comment?
I just wanted to ask Budget Chair Lebo, when you ran these numbers, are you reinstating the monies that were already cut or from budgets?
I used the baseline numbers that were in the budget. The numbers are the ones that are in the
So we had
baseline budget going forward.
Okay, so we cut $500,000. We also had 8 positions that were requested of the team, including a part-time HR person. So in considering these numbers, I think it's important to context from the administration standpoint that you consider that we cut things, including travel to DC, training, other things. If that, I believe there are many things that are essential, part of essential services. If we're And additionally, the question of appropriate staffing going forward, at the very least, HR considerations, because we're in a place where we're, yeah. So when you talk about a balance, the balance is the balance if you consider where the cuts were made by the administration and the council in the fall, but projecting them forward, that's, again, this is only patching part of a hole, because those, I believe that those things need to be reinstated. Mr. Hill, you had a,
No, I was just going to say you're correct. In the budget document, when you look at the out years, that carries forward those cuts because they were taken out by council. So that's our new base. So we don't put those back in the next biennium. Council would have to take action to do that.
yeah,
I think the phrase is opportunity costs, that basically we did not fund those, but these are essential services and that they should be restored at some point. They should be included in future budgets at some point.
I think that's reasonable. Yeah, thank you.
All right, okay, so I think I've kind of blown a hole in what I wanted to talk about, but let's try to get back on track. So going back to the sections that are in the resolution, I think this has been broached, so I don't, the second bullet point under this levy shall be section 3. I think we're going to get some clarity coming back next time. Again, and in the meantime, if you could do the homework of please reading the MRSC article. If you don't have a that reference, send me a note and I'll send you the link to it.
Yeah, and I think I get used to the language about the multi-year temporary levy lid lift, single year levy lid lift. I think that's going to be part of our, so get familiar with those terminologies as well. MRSC does a great job, and again with the graphics. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Councilmember Riddle. Okay, so let's move to section 4. Okay. Well, and let me just get a head nod first. That this levy shall be, that first bullet point, collected annually for 6 consecutive years, 2026 to 31. Is there any objection to that? Okay, getting the head nods here. Okay, we're good with that. All right, so section 4, use of levy proceeds. I think basically that's written really well. The only one oh, go ahead, sorry.
collected annually. Do we get it annually or do we actually get it biannually?
Annually, we presented in our budget because we
Okay.
adopt a biennial budget. However, for property tax, exactly the same as with stormwater, that is an annual, even though we adopt the intention within a biennial budget, it still has to be adopted on an annual basis.
Well, it says collected annually. I guess I just want to make sure that collected term, people, do we not collect it at April and October timeframes, or do we actually collect it annually?
I would actually defer to Attorney Pratt on that one.
And we don't have
because
to answer that right now. I just want to make sure that
Technically, you're absolutely right.
But
And
the full amount you collect is annually. You collect half and half. And
Yeah.
so I think to say annually is the appropriate language there.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to think that suddenly they don't have to pay it twice a year. Like we're not making that kind, we can't
Well, I
make that
guess
kind
you,
of change.
you could pay it all early.
Hmm?
You could pay it all early.
They could, yeah. But anyways, I just, again, from a layperson standpoint, that could be confusing.
Thank you. So in the section 4 then, the only bullet point that I had some question about was that last one, services that reduce police response to non-criminal incidents. I don't know whose language that is, but if somebody wanted to speak to that, I feel it was appropriate.
So this speaks to, and maybe could be worded differently, it's alternative response to non-criminal, how do I say? Racer is a good example. Not all the incidents that officers respond to are criminal, but they do necessitate support or assistance that does enhance our public safety. So it's written as though it's intended to provide for services such as Racer, which are not always criminal responses.
Right. So it wouldn't be covered under that 5th bullet point, which is the crisis intervention one?
It's the same kind of thing. Are there other ways that you can divert police resources to non-criminal activities that enhance public safety?
Okay, Thank you. Appreciate that.
And Razor, to your point, bullet 5 represents that, but there may be other ways that you can do it, such as education.
Okay. City Administrator Hill, sorry.
I was just wondering if it would make sense to combine those two together to say, services reduce police response to non-criminal incidents such as crisis intervention and mental health diversion programs, to kind of tee that up, because
I have no objection.
I like that.
Okay. I think we're getting head nods there. Councilmember Riddle.
No objection to that. I was, confirmation that prosecution and public defense costs is under the umbrella of public safety services and not somehow under the umbrella of court services, which might get us tripped up from just a legal standpoint.
they are outside of, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have
No.
jumped. They're outside of the court system. All the contracts go through the administration. The courts are not involved. It's a conflict of interest.
Thank you for that firm clarification. I appreciate that.
Attorney Pratt.
We're also defining public safety services in the resolution. It's not, we're not taking someone else's definition of it. So it's important what you decide to put in there. And so we have, at this point, we've put in prosecution and defense.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, so I have a clarification on language. So right before the bullet point, so it says that the levy shall be used exclusively for public safety services, including but not limited to. So I guess my question is, who determines if it's limited or not? And should we have that catch-all language? Does the catch-all language defeat our goal of enumerating for the community, we're going to spend it on X, Y, and Z?
Councilmember Riddle.
We have unknown opportunities that may come up. There could be another program like the crisis intervention or the, the diversion programs that I think we don't want to restrict ourselves from not being able to take advantage of using these funds for those types of things. I would say it is us approving the budget, which determines what we consider public safety, and the community can hold us accountable to that. I think that's how it would work.
All right, any other comments? Okay, so it looks like we're probably going to leave the language with at City Administrator Hill's modification then. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Good.
What is the next step for public outreach on advising them where we are in this process? I think continuing to advise the constituents of what we're doing might be a good idea as appropriate. So I just wanted to bring up
I'm so glad you asked.
reaching out to the people.
Okay, so the one thing that we haven't talked about is the working draft of that temporary 6-year levy to support the city's public safety needs handout. That's the one that, since you're in the vehicle, you can't see, but it's the one that has the accounting for where the dollars are going to in terms of public safety, like for instance, maintaining police staffing levels at $450,000. That one, yeah.
I remember it from last week, and I think that is a good start.
Right. And so I think the key then is that with our consulting firm, we basically start working on exactly what outreach methods we're going to be using, whether it be postcards or it's news blasts, whatever we're going to do. So I think we're let's see. Oh, City Administrator Hill, sorry.
Thank you. And to the point of public outreach, so currently we're working on a press release that would identify the June 30th meeting where council is going to bring up and discuss kind of for the last time before the public hearing, the resolution that would go forward. We would expect at that time to have head nods from council and have some consensus of what that rate is going to be that goes in there. We also have some e-news articles. Once that rate is nodded to and we draft that, then that will be for public dissemination and further advertising with the public. And we also will be advertising, the public hearing for the 10th, but that will be your final action on the resolution.
Mhm.
We also have future notices that if the council does move forward with the resolution, that the city clerk will put out notices for pro and con committees. And that's a process that then has to come back to the council by the 24th of July to be approved. Just setting the 3 members of each of those that then is sent along to the county with our resolution, explanatory statement, ballot language, et cetera. So there's several points during June and into July where we'll be reaching out to the public on this.
So Councilmember Good, was that a sufficient answer?
Yes, yes, definitely. Is it going to include the average amount of what that would equal to on the average priced home in Lake Forest Park?
Yes, that'll be part of the explanatory statement, but we can't do that until council has agreed on the rate. And so we wouldn't put out any information prior to that, because it could change.
Okay. All right, thank you. Councilmember Lebo.
I'm trying to understand this working draft where it has all these figures on it. So, is that, it's not clear to me what the intent of that is. Put it in the context that I think as a council, you don't want to hold yourself to say, I can only spend this amount of money on this item. I think what you want to do is to say, we have a gap between our forecasted revenue and what we see as our expenditures to maintain a level of service that is appropriate for our city. And in the course of doing that, though, we may see increases that don't align with these numbers that you may choose to spend money on. So I wouldn't encourage that we publish statements that say we're going to spend $450,000 on police staffing to maintain existing levels. We may need to spend $465,000 on police staffing.
No, and that's a fair point. This document, I think, is only intended to justify essentially the size of the increase that we're asking for, in the sense that that is basically what we see as our ongoing costs that we need to be able to cover annually. And you're right, our needs may change over time. You know, these numbers will vary. It's hoped, though, that by capturing this, that we get a sense of the size of the different pots that we need to be filling. And you're right, I can't tell that this is going to be what it's going to be in 2030, for instance. But it's my best guess as to our ongoing needs. That's my justification. That's why this is not in the resolution, right? Because you're right, you don't want to hold yourself to that in a resolution, but certainly in terms of justifying to our community why we need even $1.5 million, this is my attempt to answer that question. Councilmember Good.
I recall last week that we were talking about this exact thing, and we decided that we wouldn't be showing amounts and that we would instead be showing the percentage of increases on each category in lieu of showing dollar amounts, because it's, as an example, jail costs increased X amount of percentage. That way you don't have to show a dollar amount, because you know, it's just to show that the reason for this is because these things have increased at an unnatural rate. It's not a normal inflationary rate. It is above and beyond that. So that's what I remember from last week. So I remember the sheet though, but I thought that we had decided we weren't going to do it. Am I crazy?
Oh, no, that was the thrust of the argument last time. And in fact, you know, I have been going around in this in my mind as well. I do think, though, that we need to have some at least order of magnitude justification for why we're asking for, say, 1.5 million and not 15 million or 150,000. So that's the only reason that this document in my mind exists. You're right, because we don't know what our costs are going to be even in 2028, for instance. So holding ourselves to this particular set of numbers does seem to be premature. I don't know if that's the right word. Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I think that the two numbers that we should be thinking about is, one, what it took us to balance the budget this last cycle, and what from our unallocated funds for ongoing operating expenses. And again, I advocate for the unallocated funds to be used for one-time expenses and not ongoing operating expenses. So that was about $1 million, give or take. We was about 1.5, we pulled $500,000 out, leaving us with a 1 million that we had to use our savings, if you will, towards. Honestly, that 1.5 number is the number that we're short. And we can tell them why and where and it came from, but the number you're looking for is we needed 1.5 to balance the budget this last budget cycle. That's what we need. And that gives you all the services you're getting right now, but you're not really getting anything new and big. You are just enabling us to continue our operations as at the high level that you expect it to be right now. These are great numbers for us to kind of understand, but that's the numbers that I'd pull from our biennial budget is we were 1.5 short. We need 1.5 to meet that gap.
Councilmember Good?
Yes, I agree with that in theory, but then if your costs go up at another 1.8 million in some other year, then you know that it's saying, well, you said it was 1.5 million. Why is it 1.8 million? So I'm just trying to think, what would someone say if they saw a fixed dollar amount on anything and the amount wavered either plus or minus?
Well, I'll take that one. It's because we do actually have to ask for the levy lid lift, and that is a certain dollar amount per thousand. And, you know, to our best estimate, you know, using Councilmember Riddle's reasoning, that's what we think the hole in the budget is, and that's what we need to fill. Sure, you're right. It could be much bigger next year, but there's no justification right now for that. So we're going with, because of course, we don't want to hurt our residents. We don't want to hurt folks on limited incomes and things, you know, and I certainly don't want to hurt myself. So my point is that basically we took our best guess as to what the hole was. It's justified by basically the last year's budget that we passed, and we're just trying to fill that hole. We may have to revisit it in the future, but that's going to be 6 years down the line, according to this. Okay, so let's see. Wow. Let's go with Mayor French, then Councilmember Goldman, and then Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you, everybody. As a middle child here, I'd offer that I think you're all saying the same thing, in effect. I mean, thank you, Councilmember Good and Councilmember Lebo and Riddle and everyone here. I think you're saying basically the same thing. This is a working document. I think it's excellent for us to have it as a reference point. And to the point of the council members that have indicated that we don't know what's coming down the pike. This is the best guess. We do our best. And again, I hate to say best guess, but with the uncertainty we've had over the last couple of years, I think it would be disingenuous to say that I think this is a really educated guess of where we need to go. And so this is informing the community potentially as more of a tangential kind of situation. The suggestion is not to place it within the resolution and the levy document itself. It's to say to the community, these are the numbers we're working backwards from. We had this deficit. This is where we need to go. And to Councilmember Good's point and Councilmember Lebo's point and Councilmember Riddle's point as well, I think really it's not specific numbers. We know that the new foundation of what our costs are much higher, exponentially higher, honestly, than where they were just a couple of years ago or even last year. So finding our way forward with this I would suggest focusing on the number of the levy. I think this excellent working draft informs the number that you need to decide on the levy rate. Focus on that, focus on the language within the resolution, and then you'll get where you need to be. And then we can also, as a group, talk about, and as a community, talk about what these expenditures are looking at. Because I think that we've had this conversation for a very long period of time about how expensive things have gotten. And the one-time foundational jumps, I keep using that word, there's probably a better analogy or metaphor or image, are real. They're real. Jail costs, dispatch costs, insurance costs. Those things are not, they're tied to inflation, but they're not inflation based. They are new. They are things they're unexpected. And to anyone who wants to ask about dispatch, let's have a conversation about Bothell and Normcom, because we had a great deal going with Bothell. We really did. They provided excellent service with us. When they chose to go in a different direction, we had to go with a different provider. There's no negotiation on trying to get that contract down to a newer level. This is where we are. It's only going to go with the region, unfortunately, folks.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Yes, so I'm broadly in agreement. Often I'm coming back to how do we communicate this to the public? How do we explain our financial challenges? And one end is simplicity, the other end is specificity. The simple approach is to, as I think Councilmember Riddle alluded to say, here's what our budget looked like. Here's how much we were eating into our unallocated general fund. And here's where we came up with the levy number. On the specific side, we will have members of the community that are going to say, well, do you really need all that money? And then that's where we can point to and say, it's not like we're going to allocate exactly $450,000, but how do we get to 1.5 million in public safety increases? Some of it is coming from maintaining police staff. Some of it is coming from prosecutors. Some of it is coming from jail and dispatch. So I think there's room for both of those. The question is, how do we tell the most compelling story to our community about our financial challenges? I think I don't know that I've come up with an answer to my own questions, but I think there's room for both to say how we came up with the top line number, but also where the money might go based on, extrapolating from past increases.
Councilmember Riddle?
Very similar thought as Vice Chair Goldman. I think that, yeah, there are the two numbers, just as he said. There's what we're needing to put in this document and kind of understand. And then there's when the residents ask us why, we have an actual reason why. We can bring up specific numbers. I think as long as we can do those two things, that will start telling that, real story of where we're at right now, where we need to be. So, echoing what my colleague said, essentially.
All right, thank you. Is there anybody else who has a comment? Okay, then, so I think the next touch we're going to have on this is on the 23rd at the council of the whole meeting. Councilmember Lebo, will you be able to discuss the sales tax proposal? Great, thank you. And I think just for clarity, we've been kicking over a lot of stones, and we had brought up this idea of the state giving us new authority to deal with the real estate excise tax. We've had that vetted, and I believe City Administrator Hill and Attorney Pratt, we don't. Okay, so
It was actually Director Vaughn
Director
who
Reed.
brought out to MRC just to double check, but we were taking the full REIT. It's the first 0.25 and the second 0.25. The only changes in this last legislative session was to let you spend REIT money from REIT 1 and REIT 2 and REIT 2 and REIT 1. And that came out of a flexibility desire from some cities that spend their REIT 2 money currently for affordable housing projects to have a little more flexibility with their dollars. So we're charging the full amount. And as Director Vaughn pointed out previously, it's not general fund money. It goes elsewhere. So.
All right. Thank you for the clarification. But yeah, folks, we are looking at every single rock and turning it over and seeing what's under there. Generally, there's nothing. Okay, so I'm going to turn the gavel back over to the mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Deputy Mayor Furtani, excellent discussion, you guys. Since it's a special meeting, we can't have any further discussion beyond what's on the agenda. And with that, we are adjourned about 30 minutes early. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion.